The call to action. The dark skies of Zeus Prime were filled with a quiet tension, the kind that only existed in places of despair, where the weight of oppression hung like a heavy cloud. The city, once bustling with alien life, now seemed like a hollow shell of its former self. The cries of a tortured Vxar girl echoed through the cold night air, but no one in the crowded, dim-lit bar paid any attention. Their world had grown numb to the screams, the violence, and the suffering. But one man, sitting alone in a corner booth, couldn't ignore it. Michael Jones was not a man easily rattled. A former Marine, now turned mercenary, he had seen his fair share of violence, of heart-wrenching moments, and of broken promises. The grizzled ex-soldier had long ago abandoned the ideals of honor and duty that once defined him. He had become pragmatic, operating solely on the principle of survival. That was until tonight. As the waitress poured him another glass of whiskey, he scanned the room, his piercing eyes darting from one alien face to the next. His hand tightened around the glass, the sharp sound of ice clinking against the side of the cup cutting through the thick air. He was used to being the outsider here. Humans weren't exactly popular on Zeus Prime, where the inhabitants of various species looked at him with disdain, treating him as little more than an unpredictable savage. But none of that mattered. Michael had a job to do, and he would get it done, no matter the cost. A figure approached his table, hooded and mysterious. Michael didn't flinch. He had learned to trust his instincts. Something told him this wasn't just another drunken alien looking for a fight. "You're Michael Jones, the human mercenary?" The figure asked in a low, almost gravelly voice, its tone laden with urgency. Michael took a long sip of his drink, never breaking eye contact. "That's me." "Who's asking?" The figure pulled back its hood, revealing the scaly, greenish skin of a Vxar, its eyes large and bulbous, a sharp contrast to the normal humanoid features Michael was accustomed to. The creature's expression was one of desperation, and there was no mistaking the sense of urgency in its voice. "I am Vortis, a diplomat of the Vxar people. I need your help," the Vxar said, leaning forward as if the very weight of its plea might break the silence. Michael raised an eyebrow, skepticism dancing in his gaze. "I don't do diplomacy. I do jobs. So, unless you're paying for my services, I suggest you leave." Vortis's hand shook slightly as he placed a small holographic device on the table. The flickering lights illuminated his face, showing a flicker of emotion. "Fear. It's not diplomacy I need. It's your skills as a warrior. My daughter. She's been kidnapped by a rival clan. They plan to sacrifice her to their gods in a brutal ritual. No one else will help us. Please, Michael, you're our only hope." The words hit Michael harder than he expected. Sacrifice. A brutal ritual. It wasn't the kind of job he was used to. His usual missions involved smuggling, extraction, or cleaning up messes that someone else had made. But this felt different. It tugged at something inside him, something that had been dormant for years. He leaned back in his chair, contemplating the offer. A small part of him, the part that had been buried beneath years of cynicism, rose to the surface. What if he could actually make a difference? He glanced at Vortis, seeing the raw desperation in the creature's eyes. No one else was going to help, and Michael knew better than anyone that sometimes you had to step in when no one else would. Michael's voice was low and steady when he finally spoke. "I'll do it, but I play by my own rules. No promises." Vortis's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Anything. Just bring my daughter back alive." Michael stood, towering over the Vxar, his shadow stretching across the dimly lit room. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a weapon. He didn't need to say more. The unspoken threat hung in the air like a dense fog. "You better have my payment ready when I return," he warned. "And if you're lying to me." Vortis nodded quickly, his face pale as he understood the weight of Michael's words. "I won't lie. I swear on my daughter's life." With that, Michael turned and exited the bar, his mind already shifting into mission mode. He wasn't a hero, not by anyone's definition. He was a mercenary, a man who did what he was paid to do. But this felt different. As he walked into the cool night air of Zeus Prime, his thoughts lingered on the mission ahead. A kidnapping, a blood sacrifice. The stakes had just gone up. The journey to Vox Prime was a long one. Michael and Vortis boarded a small, unmarked spacecraft to avoid drawing attention. Michael didn't want to risk a run-in with the authorities. They needed to be discreet, and that meant flying under the radar. The ship was cramped, but the silence between the two of them was even more suffocating. As the ship broke through Zeus Prime's atmosphere, Michael caught his first glimpse of the Vor homeworld. Vox Prime was a wild, untamed planet. Sprawling jungles filled with ancient trees, jagged mountain ranges, and endless open deserts stretched as far as the eye could see. The landscape was a stark contrast to the sleek, modern world of Zeus Prime. It was a planet of extremes, beautiful but deadly. Vortis leaned over the control panel, his hands trembling. "We'll land outside the capital city, Vortex. From there, we'll head to the temple where they are keeping area." Michael nodded, his eyes scanning the planet below. The capital city was a mixture of ancient stone temples and modern structures, all surrounded by high, imposing walls. It was a place where tradition clashed with the present, where the past and future collided in a chaotic mess. As their ship descended toward the city, Michael's trained eyes immediately noticed the guards patrolling the landing platform. They were all Vrzar, armed with plasma rifles and eyes full of suspicion. The moment they landed, Michael's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his weapon. "Stay close to me," Vortis whispered, his voice tight with fear, "and try not to make eye contact. They're not fond of humans." Michael couldn't help but chuckle darkly. "I'm not worried about their fondness," he muttered. "I'm more worried about them trying to start something they won't finish." Vortis led him through the city's gates, and Michael could feel the eyes of the Vrzar upon him. Whispers in a language he didn't understand filled the air, but the tone was unmistakable. These creatures didn't want him here. To them, humans were unpredictable, violent, and dangerous. They didn't trust him. As they walked through the bustling streets, Michael's mind raced. He had to stay focused. The mission was clear. Get in, find area, and get her out. But even as he plotted his next move, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here. Something more dangerous. Vortis led him to a massive stone structure in the heart of the city, the Grand Temple. It stood tall and imposing, its sides adorned with intricate carvings that told stories of the ancient gods the Vrzar worshipped. There was a glowing energy field around the temple, a shield that kept unwanted visitors at bay. "This is where they will perform the sacrifice," Vortis whispered, his voice filled with dread. Michael studied the structure carefully. It was a fortress, well guarded and heavily fortified. But he had faced worse odds before. He wasn't backing down now. "Let's get to work," Michael muttered, his voice low and determined. The plan was simple: infiltrate, find area, and get her out. But in a city full of hostile aliens, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. The mission was only beginning. The Temple of Sacrifice. The path leading to the Temple of Vortex was lined with towering stone statues, each one a representation of the ancient Vrzar gods. Their glowing eyes seemed to watch Michael and Vortis as they moved through the crowded streets of the capital, a constant reminder of the power and fear that the gods held over the people of Vox Prime. Despite the alien architecture and unfamiliar atmosphere, Michael kept his focus sharp. His senses were honed, trained over years of mercenary work, always on high alert for any potential threats. Vortis walked beside him, looking more nervous with each step. The usually confident diplomat was now a man on the verge of a breaking point, as if his world, once filled with hope, was slowly unraveling. His eyes darted around, constantly scanning for any signs of trouble. It was clear that even here in his own city, Vortis was not immune to the underlying dangers that surrounded them. "We're getting close," Vortis whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the city. Michael nodded but didn't respond. He didn't need to. His mind was already calculating their next move. They had to get inside the temple without drawing attention. The last thing they needed was for the Vexar guards to catch wind of their presence. The heavily fortified structure loomed ahead, its dark stone exterior bathed in the eerie glow of energy shields that hummed quietly around its perimeter. It was designed to be impenetrable, a place of worship and sacrifice, guarded by the most loyal of the Vexar soldiers. As they neared the temple's entrance, Michael's sharp eyes picked out the guards stationed at every corner. Armed with plasma rifles and standing at attention, they had the air of soldiers who would die without question to protect their sacred ground. Michael couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. This was no ordinary mission. This was a rescue mission, one that would test everything he had. His combat skills, his patience, and his ability to navigate a world where humans were nothing more than disposable mercenaries. Vortis, sensing Michael's hesitation, turned to him. "They're not just guards, Michael. They're fanatics. They worship their gods with a devotion that's beyond reason. They believe Aria's death will bring them closer to their gods." Michael glanced at Vortis, his eyes hardening. "I don't care about their gods. I care about saving that girl." Vortis nodded solemnly. "I know. But you need to understand that if they catch us, there will be no negotiation. They will kill us without hesitation. I've seen it happen before." Michael's lips curled into a grim smile. "Then we won't get caught." With that, the two of them moved closer to the temple's back entrance, where a group of guards stood watch. They would need to bypass the guards and slip through unnoticed. Michael had already scouted out the layout of the area and identified a small, unguarded service door on the side of the temple. It was a long shot, but it was their best chance. The air grew thicker as they approached the door. Michael could feel the eyes of the guards on him, even if they weren't looking directly at him. It was the kind of feeling you got when you knew you were being watched. His heart rate slowed as he took a deep breath, his instincts kicking in. He was in the zone now. "You stay here," Michael whispered to Vortis as he moved to the door, his hand brushing against the cool stone of the temple's exterior. "I'll handle this." Vortis didn't argue. He was too tense, his nerves raw from the long journey, and the constant fear that his daughter was already beyond reach. Instead, he simply nodded, clutching a small palm-sized communicator in his hand, ready to signal Michael if things went wrong. Michael moved swiftly and silently, slipping into the shadows as the guards turned their backs. The service door was old but sturdy, its hinges creaking slightly as he tested them. With a quick twist of his wrist, he pried open the door just enough to slip through. The inside of the temple was dark and musty, a stark contrast to the bright, sterile energy fields that surrounded its exterior. The air smelled of incense and ancient rituals, and the walls were lined with murals depicting the triumphs of the Vexar gods. He moved cautiously through the dimly lit hallways, his boots silent on the cold stone floor. The temple was vast, with corridors branching off in every direction, but Michael had memorized the layout. His mission was clear: find Aria, get her out, and make sure they left before the ritual began. The deeper he ventured into the temple, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thick with the energy of centuries of sacrifice and bloodshed. Michael could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, as if the temple itself were alive, a living testament to the horrors that had taken place within its walls. He paused for a moment, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. The sound of footsteps echoed from around the corner. He pressed himself flat against the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. The guards were coming. He couldn't afford to be caught now, not when he was so close. The footsteps grew louder, and Michael's grip on his weapon tightened. He had no time to waste. The guards rounded the corner, their weapons raised and their eyes scanning the darkened hallway. Michael stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, as they passed by him. He could feel the heat of their bodies as they moved just inches away. But they didn't see him. They didn't sense him. Once they were out of sight, Michael exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body in a rush. He moved quickly now, his steps more purposeful. He had to find area before the ritual began. Time was running out. As he neared the heart of the temple, he could hear chanting in a language he didn't understand. The sound was both haunting and hypnotic, filling the air with a sense of dread. It was coming from a large chamber at the center of the temple. Michael pressed himself against the wall, peering around the corner to see what awaited him. Inside the chamber, a group of Czar priests stood in a circle, their hands raised toward the sky, chanting in unison. At the center of the circle, chained to an altar, was a girl, Arya. Her body was bruised and bloodied, but her eyes were defiant. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. Michael's heart clenched at the sight. She was alive. He hadn't been too late. He drew a deep breath and began to formulate his plan. There were too many guards and priests in the room, and he didn't have enough firepower to take them all down. But there was a weakness. There always was. Michael's mind raced as he scanned the chamber, looking for anything he could use to his advantage. Then he saw it, a large, ancient stone pillar near the back of the room. If he could knock it loose, it might create enough of a distraction to take out the guards and free Arya. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best one he had. Without hesitation, he pulled a small explosive charge from his belt and placed it at the base of the pillar. He set the timer, his eyes never leaving the altar where Arya lay. He was running out of time. If he didn't act now, she would be lost to the ritual, and he would have failed. Michael silently backed away, blending into the shadows. The countdown began, each second feeling like an eternity. The breaking point. The heavy silence of the temple was shattered by the low hum of the timer ticking away. Michael's breath steadied as he crouched in the shadows, his eyes never leaving Arya, still chained to the altar in the center of the chamber. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the pressure of the situation. Every movement, every second, was crucial. He couldn't afford any mistakes. The charges placed on the pillar would create the distraction he needed, but they also carried the risk of bringing the entire structure down if they weren't careful. The chanting in the chamber continued, a rhythmic, hypnotic sound that seemed to pierce through the heavy air. The Czar priests had their eyes closed, their faces contorted in the ecstasy of their religious fervor, unaware of the danger that loomed just moments away. The guards stood still, their weapons trained on Arya, their eyes fixed on the ritual. Michael could see the glint of anticipation in their gazes. They were ready for the sacrifice to begin. But Michael wasn't ready to let that happen. Not on his watch. The explosive timer ticked down, each second weighing heavily on his mind. He could feel the energy in the room shifting, the tension in the air thickening. This was it. He had to act now. If the charge detonated at the wrong time, everything would be lost. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Michael pressed his back against the cool stone wall of the corridor, his hand gently resting on the hilt of his plasma rifle. His plan was simple, but dangerous. The explosion would send debris flying, knocking out the guards and the priests. In the chaos that followed, he would rush in, disable the remaining guards, and free Arya. It was risky, but it was their only chance. He checked the timer once more. 10 seconds left. Stay calm, he whispered to himself, his mind already calculating the next steps. Get her out. Now. The explosive charge was primed, and there was no turning back. He inhaled deeply and made the decision. With a quick glance toward the altar, Michael bolted from his hiding place, dashing across the chamber, his movements fluid and quick. His boots made barely a sound as he sprinted toward the far corner, where the ancient stone pillar loomed ominously. The priests continued to chant, oblivious to the approaching danger. The guards shifted their weight slightly but remained stationary, caught in the trance of the ritual. Michael reached the pillar with just seconds to spare. He could see the thick veins of the stone, cracks in the structure that hinted at its age. Without hesitation, He pressed the button on the explosive device, activating the timer and sealing their fate. The explosion was a deafening roar. The entire temple seemed to shake as the pillar cracked and crumbled, chunks of stone breaking loose and tumbling to the floor. The energy field around the temple flickered, then flared, its power destabilized by the blast. The priests immediately stopped their chanting, their eyes snapping open in alarm. The guards were thrown into disarray as the explosion sent them staggering backward. Smoke filled the air, and the scent of burning stone mixed with the acrid tang of the ancient incense that lingered in the temple. In the chaos, Michael didn't waste a second. He moved like a shadow, darting across the room, his gun raised and ready. The guards were confused, disoriented, struggling to regain control as debris fell around them. One of the priests yelled in panic, trying to rally the remaining guards, but it was already too late. Michael fired, the plasma rifle's sharp crack cutting through the air. The first guard fell, his body crumpling to the ground as the shot connected with his chest. He didn't even have time to react. Michael's next shot took down another guard, a clean hit to the head. There was no time for hesitation. Every move had to be swift, precise. "Get up, area," Michael shouted as he neared the altar. The Vizar girl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and hope. Her body was still chained to the altar, but her spirit hadn't broken. Despite the pain and the blood, there was a fire in her eyes, a defiance that made Michael's resolve stronger. One of the priests charged at Michael, a ritual dagger in hand. Michael swung his rifle in a fluid motion, knocking the weapon from the priest's grasp and sending him crashing to the ground. Another priest shouted for reinforcements, but Michael was already moving, his foot landing on the stone floor with a solid thud. He aimed his rifle at the remaining guards, taking them out one by one with lethal precision. In mere moments, the room was filled with the sounds of groaning bodies and collapsing stone. The once ritualistic calm of the temple was replaced by the chaos of battle. But in the center of it all stood Michael, unwavering. His focus never left Arya as he reached the altar. He knelt beside her, his hands moving quickly to remove the chains that bound her. "Arya, we're getting you out of here," he said, his voice low but steady. He could feel the weight of the task ahead. They weren't out of danger yet. The explosion had been a diversion, but it was only a matter of time before more guards arrived. Arya looked at him with wide eyes, her voice hoarse from the earlier screams. You're the human?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. Michael didn't have time for explanations. "Yes, I'm human. And I'm here to get you out. Now, can you walk?" The chains fell to the ground with a soft clink, and Arya stood, her legs unsteady at first, but quickly gaining strength. She nodded, her gaze shifting to the chaos unfolding around them. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. "Out of here. As fast as we can," Michael replied. He grabbed her arm gently, leading her toward the back of the temple where they had entered. But just as they started to move, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. More guards. Reinforcements. Michael cursed under his breath. They had to move faster. "Vortis!" Michael shouted, turning to the hallway where the diplomat had been waiting. "We need to move now." Vortis appeared in the doorway, looking frantic but determined. "I'm here. Let's go." The three of them ran through the temple's dark corridors, weaving between fallen stone and the debris of the explosion. The air was thick with dust, and Michael could feel the weight of every passing second. He knew they didn't have much time. The Vizar weren't known for their mercy, and if they caught up with them, they wouldn't hesitate to kill them all. As they neared the back exit, Michael heard a shrill cry. It was the sound of the priest, rallying his forces. The Vizar were regrouping, and they were coming after them. "Keep moving," Michael shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. They had to make it to the ship. The only chance they had was to get back to the spacecraft and leave the planet before reinforcements could trap them. They burst through the back door and into the open air, the fresh breeze a welcome change from the stale air inside the temple. The city of Vortex lay spread out before them, but there was no time to admire the view. Their ship was waiting for them on the landing pad, and every step felt like an eternity as Michael's heart pounded in his chest. Behind them, the sound of the Czar priest's voice echoed, growing louder as the rest of the temple guards closed in. They were gaining on them. "Arya, get to the ship now," Michael barked. Vortis and Arya broke into a sprint, and Michael followed closely behind, his rifle at the ready. He could hear the guards' footsteps getting closer. Time was running out. They had to make it to the ship before it was too late. The chaos of the temple faded into the distance as they ran toward their only hope of survival.